All right, let's get started. This board workshop. Let me read a couple of things first before we continue. Good evening. I'm Isidro Nieto, President of Weslaco ISD Board of Trustees. Please let the minutes reflect the notice that this board meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours, permitted by the suspended portion of the Texas Open Meetings Act as permitted by Governor Abbott. We do have a quorum of trustees that are gathered in central fiscal location. We do have a quorum of trustees in attendance in this meeting by video conference or telephone call. The board is meeting by the use of the platform of Google Hangout, Meet, and telephone transmission, which allows two-way communication for members of the public during the public comment portion of the agenda. The meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public in accordance with the law. As we would at any person meeting, members of the public who have followed the instructions on the meeting notice for registering to speak during the public comment portion of the agenda will be called at the telephone number they have provided. All other board meeting procedures would adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. Today is July the 6th, and I call this workshop. We have Mr. Patrick Kennedy here today? No. Dr. Jaime? Not yet. Mr. Gonzalez?
Present. Is
Dr. Rivera present? Okay. Mr. Erasmo Lopez?
I'm here.
Coach Cuellar?
Present.
And myself, Mr. Nieto. We didn't have anybody sign up for public comments, even though it's a workshop. Item number 4, updates on COVID-19 and planning. Dr. Canales.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and everybody out joining us today for this workshop. We are going to begin with COVID-19 updates and planning. I will move to present mode. Okay, Mr. Nieto, will you please verify that you can see this?
Yes, I can see it.
Well, Board of Trustees and people joining us, we're at a very, very different place than we were just last month when we met on June 8th, 2020. On June 8th, 2020, the number of cases in our county was 701. Not even a month later, on July 6, 2020, our counts are at 4,798. So COVID-19, the number of cases has escalated. Recoveries still continue to grow, but the number of people contacting this virus has increased tremendously. So we need to keep that in mind, as always, as we plan for next school year and probably the next couple of years. That's very important to us. And we do realize that these numbers could change. We're hoping that they change, that we start seeing a decline in the number of positive cases by day, then by week, and then by month. But we're in a wait and see right now, see what's going to happen. Our governor did issue executive order number GA-29 relating to the use of face coverings during the COVID-19 disaster for everybody 10 and over. As a requirement and subject to fine after a warning if they're not used. So it's serious, not only Hidalgo County, but across the state of Texas. For us, the safety and security of staff and students, for all of us, our Weslaco ISD community is of utmost importance. And we look at the counts every single day. We look at the guidance being provided by TEA, the Texas Education Agency, and that has changed even within the span of a week. Things have been changing. And of course, we look to our health officials, the Centers for Disease Control, Hidalgo County Health Department, and all our partners, not only the city, county, but at the state level, as we address COVID-19. For this part of the presentation, I would like to start with Mr. De La Rosa and Weslaco ISD COVID-19 protocol. Many people ask, well, what does Weslaco ISD do if an employee tests positive and is still on work schedule? Well, we have many people off for the summer. There's still a handful of people that are still working. So I'm going to ask Mr. De La Rosa to share the protocol that's been established. Mr. De La Rosa and team have worked hand in hand with county and city officials and health officials and the guidance from TEA and the CDC to develop this protocol. So Mr. De La Rosa.
Thank you, Dr. Canales. Good afternoon, President Nieto, Dr. Canales, members of the board. I'd like to go ahead and start by reading just basically our mission statement that we have for this protocol. And it's basically that, the safety and security of students and staff is one of Weslaco ISD's primary goals. During these unprecedented times, Weslaco ISD will adhere to the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, and Texas Education TA guidance to ensure a safe and healthy learning environment. So what we're going to be doing is I'll run through these preliminary operations. I'd like to qualify by saying that the situation is extremely fluid and changing daily. So that being said, I'll go ahead and go into the preliminary information that we have for the fall. Next slide, please, Dr. Canales. So for the fall 2020, these are our preliminary safety protocols that we're going to be adhering to. So staff and students will be screened for COVID-19 systems before coming onto campus each day. Hand sanitizer, hand washing stations when soap and water will be placed at each entrance. So we will be requiring students, teachers, and staff to use hand sanitizers and hand washing stations whenever they enter the building. Hand sanitizer or hand washing stations with soap and water will be available in every classroom. And teachers and students will be required to sanitize on or wash hands frequently. So a big part of this endeavor is going to be training for both students and staff. Again, redundant, repetitious training in good hand washing techniques and given frequent opportunities to wash their hands. Also stress the importance of social distancing. Employees will be required to wear face coverings, of course, over the nose and mouth. And of course, when appropriate, students will be required to wear them as well. So we have been working with Coach Riojas and his team, and we have developed a rigorous disinfecting program based on CD guidelines and recommendations. That doesn't just apply to classrooms, but that applies to office spaces and our fleet of buses as well. So if I can have the next slide, Dr. Canales. I'm going to run through quickly what the process is of an employee diagnosis or exposure to COVID-19. So all employees are advised to immediately contact the risk management department by phone or email if they are exposed to or diagnosed with COVID-19. If they report this to their supervisors, we ask that their supervisors immediately contact us if their employees report any symptoms of diagnosis or potential exposure to COVID-19. So what happens after that is that my department, they contacts the employee and advises the following. We advise of any leave benefits, including emergency paid sick leave and or expanded Emergency Family Medical Leave Act that is an extension of the current Family Medical Leave Act. We also identify the individuals that may have been identified as that are at risk for exposure. So when we do reach out to the employee, we do visit with them and say, okay, well, who did you come into close contact with? And then we advise those individuals as well to take the steps to self-quarantine. We don't mandate that people get tested that may have been exposed, but we do highly encourage it. All employees must submit a fitness for duty from their doctor before returning to work. Does anybody have any questions on that before I move on to the next slide? Okay.
One question. Yes. On the emergency paid sick leave, I'm assuming that the staff will be trained on that just in case any particular staff member gets tested positive, correct?
Yes, we advise the employee that if they test positive, they are entitled to emergency paid sick leave, and that is approximately 80 hours of sick leave or 2 weeks, 10 days basically, that the employee is covered. But that's not only if they are exposed. I mean, it's not only if they are confirmed positive, but if they also are exposed to and are getting tested to, they are eligible for this emergency paid sick leave at the time. Right now, that the employees that are doing that, we have a lot of employees that are actually working from home right now, so they're not having to use that leave. But we do advise them and make sure that it's known that it is available to all.
Okay.
Mike, question, Mike.
Let the record reflect that Dr. Jaime just joined the workshop. Welcome, Dr. Jaime.
Hello. Mike, are we letting employees know what an exposure is going to count as? You know, are we letting them know that if it's 15 minutes or less, or 15 minutes or more, do they know exactly what that's going to entail?
It's a known close contact with anybody for more than 15 minutes. CDC defines known close contact is within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So we work with the employee to identify any individual that may have been that does meet those qualifications, and then we in turn advise the employees that that may have been in that situation or may have been exposed to that.
So just to clarify, just because somebody was in the building doesn't automatically classify you as being exposed.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Close contact within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. Those are the CDC guidelines that we use. And any employee who does fall into that threshold will get notice from the risk management department. Good on that? Okay. So basically other things, I'm not going to go through these. I'm just going to touch on them just briefly. So what we do is when there is a confirmed case, of course, we notify the superintendent, district leaders, including the board. We have been doing that via the board update. So we do work with the supervisor and employee to determine the last date the employee was physically present in any district facility. So going back to what Dr. Hyman was referring to is do work with not only the employee and the supervisor to identify any person who may have been potentially exposed, again, within 6 feet, more than 15 minutes of contact. So we do work with the custodial staff, Coach Rosa's group, to sanitize all areas the employee may have had contact or been exposed to. For example, we'll go in and sterilize the offices, hallways, etc. And again, I've touched on this one, determine the last time any employees may have had close contact. And of course, we contact employees that may have been exposed by phone and email. So what does that look like when the fall of 2020 opens up? And if there's a student diagnosed or had exposure to COVID-19, it's going to be basically the same thing as what we do for the employees with the following additions, if you will, or extra steps we have to do. So schools will immediately separate any student who shows COVID-19 symptoms. The student will be isolated at the school until the student can be picked up by a parent or guardian. So for example, if a student comes in and is screened, is running a high fever, or expresses any of these symptoms that they may be feeling related to COVID-19, we'd have to immediately separate that student, put him in isolation, and contact the parents. We are working on a special transportation unit designed to take students home if a parent does not have transportation. So again, proper PPE, disinfecting the vehicle. We are working to develop that. Actually, we've already pretty much got it done. We would have to close off any of the areas used by an individual, whether it be a student, teacher, or staff member. For example, if we have a class of 20 or 22 students, then the entire class would have to be notified of the potential exposure, and they would all have to be ordered to self-quarantine until they can clear. So those are basically those two bullets that I've covered there. These are, again, based on TEA guidelines as of June 9th, I believe. That's the last time they put anything out. And this was regarding to summer school. We're still waiting again for more guidance and for more from TEA, but this is a preliminary operation of what we're doing in expectations of the fall 2020 semester. So with that, if anybody has any questions or items they'd like to see, please let me know.
Hey, no questions, but just to comment on employees who report that they are positive, they have a confirmed case. We do keep the information confidential. Mr. De La Rosa does a great job. Even when he reports to me as a superintendent, I have no need to know the name unless I'm one of the people that was within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So we do maintain confidentiality as required by health guidelines.
HIPAA, correct.
Dr. Canales or Mike, what about staff that's off currently right now for summer break? Or are they required to let us know? Do we need to know? What's the protocol with them?
Since they're off contract and they haven't been on campus, they're not technically required to advise us. However, we do encourage it, and we appreciate it so that we can have that information. But nobody's, for example, a teacher that's not on contract that just finds out that they do have it. We are working on an interlocal with the city and the school district, so we'd be able to, the city will be able to identify potential employees that they know have tested positive. So we're working on that end to find out that way. And then, of course, once we have that information, we can follow up with them before they report back to work and make sure everything's on the up and up.
Thank you.
That's a good question there, Dr. Jaime, because if we find out of any staff members later on, especially 20 days before we begin school, if they're quarantined at that time, it's important that we know so that way they won't begin when students will begin. For right now, it's true, they're off calendar, and so they're self-quarantined and getting better. But what about later on in late July or early August? Just that's a good comment, Dr. Jaime.
Are employees being instructed on what is fact and not fact when somebody feels ill about anything, so that nothing is circulated out there that somebody was tested positive or somebody was sick with it and in reality was not, and that nobody's trying to hide anything?
I know, Coach Guerra, that Coach, we have had several meetings with groups of employees where that information has been relayed to them. So they're advised that, if they have been identified as having close contact with an individual who tested positive, they will be notified by the risk management department. So if they did not receive that letter, then they have not potentially been exposed or identified. Secondly, we do get a lot of calls. I heard so-and-so was, tested positive. I want to know. And of course, we cannot give any personal health information out because that's all protected by HIPAA. And we also do get a lot of calls of, well, my husband, I'm exaggerating here, but, my husband's daughter's friend tested positive, and I just happened to see them at HEB. What do I do? And then that's, we give the individual direction to the employee that no, that's not considered immediate close exposure, because you don't really, you don't know, you don't have all the facts, and you don't know if it's a lab confirmed case. So we deal with those issues as they come along, Coach.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comment, Mr. Lopez or Mr. Gonzalez?
I'm good. Thanks, Mike.
Has there been any discussion on testing employees before they come back to school?
We are looking at that, Mr. Lopez. We have talked to a company that can provide it. However, we have not made a definite decision on that. I don't know if we can require testing before employees come back to work, but we are looking into it for the fall. Yes, sir.
Well, the only reason I say is that there will be a lot of, I feel that there would possibly be some rumors spreading around that this person was sick. And I think that to cover the district, we should maybe look into that as far as if it's legal and possible to do. Just a thought. And if not, at least a statement signed by everybody that says, I have not been around anybody. I am not sick. I have not been sick. I have not shown any symptoms in the past 60 days or 90 days, that would put a person to think before they sign something like that. And if they have, well, they might think twice and before they go back to school.
And that was part, Mr. Lopez, that was part of the initial protocol when we first opened up on the software reopening, was employees did have to self-evaluate and report any symptoms listed, whether it be the fever, headache, cough, etc. They would have to advise us that they are experiencing those symptoms.
Yeah, if something like that is gonna happen, or if you feel it's gonna happen, Mike, I would think that the wise thing to do would be to get on that before the last week or 2 weeks before school starts. Then it'd be a mad dash, and everybody's waiting on results, and everybody's waiting on this, and then people can't come back to work, and I think we'd be in a bad place.
Yes, sir. We will definitely take a look at that.
All right. Thank you. That's all I got.
All right, Mr. Gonzalez, any comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Mike.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
continue, Dr. Canales or Mike, whatever it's.
So moving on, we're going to move to the impact of COVID-19 on educational decisions for the 2020-2021 academic school year. As mentioned at the last meeting, the decision-making process for educators, for leaders, for all educators all over the state has changed. Before it was just Texas Education Agency, UIL, go Weslaco ISD. Now we have to look at the CDC guidelines. We have to look at our governor for any executive orders and listen to our Hidalgo County health officials as well. So things have changed drastically in less than a year for all educators, for all students, for all families everywhere. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about the 2020-2021 academic school year. We're using information from the Texas Education Agency, which has changed throughout the summer. So we're using the latest information as part of this presentation. And please note that it is subject to change. You saw the numbers, 700 to now almost 5,000 cases in Hidalgo County. So things are changing, and they're changing almost every single day. So to lead us through this part of the presentation, we have Mr. Abel Aguilar and we have Mrs. Sue Peterson, who have been working diligently on this. I just want to make a brief comment before I turn it over to them. First of all, last month when we met, we said, okay, here are the options that the Texas Education Agency is allowing school districts. Number one, 100% face-to-face learning. Students in classrooms. At one point in the last 3 weeks, you may have read that the governor said it will be safe for students to return to schools this fall. Also, about the last time we met in June, we talked about 100% remote learning, that being a possibility. Since then, the remote learning has been defined under two methods by Texas Education Agency, synchronous and asynchronous. So we'll talk about both of those in a few minutes when Mr. Aguilar and Mrs. Peterson present. And then we talked about a hybrid. We talked about the possibility of some students coming in, us choosing and putting students in groups, and some came in on Monday and Wednesday, and some came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and perhaps the teachers planned on Friday. Well, that, over the course of the last couple of weeks, has changed. Hybrid is questionable. What does hybrid mean? Is it hybrid within the remote learning environment? Is it hybrid combination with face-to-face or on-campus learning environments and perhaps synchronous remote and or asynchronous remote? And then, of course, we know to expect sporadic short-term closures where we have to automatically shift to either synchronous or asynchronous remote learning that are going to be defined in a minute. So things are changing. I put the question mark under hybrid learning because we're still waiting for a little bit more guidance from Texas Education Agency on what that can be. And what we're learning and what we've heard that most of it's going to be a parent choice. We sent a survey out a couple of weeks ago asking our parents from these three, we included hybrid, which is your preferred method. Well, we're going to have to send surveys out again. And we're going to have to send a survey out within the 2 weeks before the school year starts. So things could be changing over and over and over again. We will keep ourselves updated. We've got a great team of district leaders, campus leaders. You know, our ears are tuned in to what's coming out from TEA and CDC. And sometimes all of us are like, oh my goodness, that's so different from last week. But that's a reality we're in. So let's move on to the presentation. Mr. Aguilar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Board President Nieto, Dr. Canales, members of the board. Hope everyone's doing well. Just a little brief overview on what two methods that TEA has proposed when it comes to remote instruction. Of course, we have number one being method A, which is a synchronous instruction. And that's going to require all participants to be present at the same time virtually, as you see there. It's going to be interactive, classes, students, and teachers participating in real-time instruction. This is going to mimic a regular class setting, and that's a purpose behind synchronous instruction. For method B is going to be the asynchronous instruction, as Dr. Canales mentioned earlier. This does not require all participants to be virtually present at the same time. So we look at asynchronous being more self-paced. In a little bit, we're going to discuss what grade levels are going to fall with a recommended method. However, they can be used interchangeably. The difference is going to be the funding piece that we will be discussing shortly. Both of those methods do follow the Texas Education Code as a required curriculum, so we will have that in place. Ms. Peterson, would you like to add anything to this?
I just want to add that right now our guidance from STC, as you know, we have a lot of students registered for dual enrollment courses. The guidance from STC right now is that all courses will be online remote. The exception to that is some of the CTE classes where the students have to do lab work, such as welding. There is still a plan to have that be at least part of the time in person. But otherwise, guidance from STC right now is that everything will be remote. Thank you, Abel.
Yes, ma'am. So with synchronous instruction, we're going to be moving into what the instructional minutes. We just wanted to add a little bit on there. We will add with the instructional minutes and the funding guidelines. Again, the face-to-face or the 100% remote instruction Monday through Friday is what we're looking at right now. I know Dr. Canales mentioned the hybrid where they could have A or B day schedules. That was not the direction. Just a few days ago from the commissioner, students will have to be receiving instruction every day. The minimum daily required minutes for full day funding, and it breaks it down into 3 bullet points right there. Pre-K through second, in order for us to receive funding, this will not happen through synchronous instruction. It will only happen through asynchronous instruction. We will be discussing a little bit more in detail, and which is a self-paced learning. And there's many reasons behind that, and they're going to have parameters on how they're going to the plan that we're going to submit and how it's going to work and whether it's going to get approved and whether we'll be receiving funding or not. The 3rd through 5th grade is going to be 180 instructional minutes, and they're not necessarily consecutive. Okay, and 6th through 12th will be 240 instructional minutes, and again, not necessarily consecutive. As I mentioned earlier, we can have interchangeable instruction when it comes to synchronous and asynchronous, but in order to receive funding, we must meet those guidelines on the instructional minutes provided. Do we have any questions on this before we move on to the next slide?
Any question by any of the board members? Dr. Rivera joined the meeting a few minutes ago, so welcome, Dr. Rivera. Any comments? No? Okay, so continue, Mr. Aguilar.
Yes, sir. Next slide, Dr. Canales. Okay, so here's a breakdown of what we've been looking at. It's some preliminary guidance, from TEA. One, we wanted to make sure, one point to the far top left, we have the social distancing and the spacing. And these are 3 important factors that we have to keep in mind. And of course, this is still going back and forth and a lot of pending. The 45 square feet of space per individual, 22 total individuals in a typical classroom space. Those are going to be your larger areas, such as a cafeteria, gym, library, or other large spaces. And of course, those are going to have 6 feet apart, facing in the same direction. If we have 22 in those large areas, those will have a spacing of 12 feet. We have a sheet where all our campus principals have been gathering all this data and how that's going to look like coming into the fall, so they can know how many individuals to expect in a certain classroom or other setting that they have. So they'll have an idea of what to expect with that. And we've been working and we've all been having these discussions and going back and forth within those parameters. For instruction, aside for the synchronous and asynchronous, and of course, we're still going to be looking at the hybrid as we gather more direction, hopefully a little bit more tomorrow from the commissioner. one question that we got to ask ourselves and parents is, can we require parents to commit to remote or on-campus instruction? The latest that we have from the commissioner is LEAs may ask their parents to commit to either on-campus or remote instruction for their students or their child no earlier than 2 weeks before the start of the year. Okay? A parent survey will be sent out, and our local education agency, which is Weslaco ISD, may survey parents prior to that period. Parent may choose between an on-campus or remote instruction. Weslaco ISD may require parents to commit to their selection until the end of the grading period. However, LEAs cannot require a student to remain in remote instruction for more than one single grading period. So if a parent, example, chooses to start off their child in a remote setting, they want to keep them at home, but then they decide that they want to bring them back to school, if they give us permission to open up our doors, then we're going to ask parents to please commit for the remainder of that grading period, which is into the 6 weeks, and then we can make those adjustments. That is the latest information that we have as of this point, and we will be working as soon as we get have a little bit more direction to send out that survey to find out what it is that our parents are going to be selecting.
If I can just echo what Dr. Canales said earlier about the great team in place. Our principals are all staying very current. They've got plans in their heads. They've got plans on paper, and they're engaging their teacher leaders in the plans also. So I'm confident that whatever happens, we will be ready, and our students will get the best education in Weslaco.
Thank you, Sue. What you have here, we have, and I want to also piggyback on what Ms. Peterson just shared. We have a teaching and learning committee that gathered, several times, during the course of the last month. And really, this was a lot of collaboration that was in place, spearheaded by our technology department, Scott Amdo, Julie Kelly, Renee Dyer, Carlos Martinez, along with several principals, teachers, grade level chairs, different leaders, members of the Aspiring Campus Administrators Committee. We all came together and shared a lot of thought on what worked and what didn't work, and what is it that we want to see moving forward with technology coming this fall. So what you see before you was a lot of technology that was vetted through the committee, and a lot of feedback that was gathered through all those involved of what it is that we need to enhance and supplement what we currently have when it comes to technology within our district. So what we're looking at here are items that we narrowed down through the committee when it comes to software and devices, and you see the quantity, the cost, and the total. This was gathered through a lot of surveys, a lot of feedback. Scott and Julie and Renee did a wonderful job gathering all this and putting it together. And these are the preliminary numbers that we have right now, about $850,000 that we're looking at as far, like I said, to enhance and supplement what we currently have when it comes to technology and moving forward with instruction, because we want to make sure that we're ready with asynchronous and asynchronous learning as soon as we get ready to open our doors and our remote learning in the fall. So does anyone have any questions with what you see here in front of you?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Lopez.
On the hotspots, is that the best way to go, or is that the only way that some students can get internet access?
I'm gonna go ahead and ask Carlos to chime in on this, and I know Dr. Canales may also add on that. I do want to add that there's been a lot of discussion with that, Mr. Lopez, regarding the hotspots and what are the capabilities and so forth. And the individuals that have been involved in gathering those hotspots within our district.
Okay, so Mr. Martinez, if you please will comment to that. In addition to the 700 that we're proposing that we need to order based upon the survey results, Mrs. Dyer, Renee Dyer, has also secured 1,000 from a special grant that she applied for. The grant was expanded and she applied for the entire district. So we'll have 1,700 hotspots for the upcoming school year. So Mr. Martinez, will you comment about the best technology to provide Wi-Fi internet connectivity to our students?
Dr. Canales, before Mr. Martinez speaks, just a reminder that that 1,700 does not include students at CTE, Early College High School, or East High School, because they are already served through the grant. So those two campuses are covered.
Awesome. Very good.
Good.
Mr. Martinez?
So in the amount of time we have, the hotspots are the best issue. Without obviously purchasing from Spectrum or another internet provider, that the parent would have to pay for to get connectivity.
Let me ask something else, Carlos. These hotspots, are they the kind that we commonly know, that personalized little devices, or are these something that are going to get set up through our internet or in our system?
These are standalone hotspots. They have unlimited amount of bandwidth, and they will be filtered so the students can't get to inappropriate information. But they're not connected directly with our internet.
Okay, so it expands. And if that's the quickest and the best way that we can get our students connected, I guess I'm okay with it. I'll agree with it. Thank you.
Something else just to mention, the Teaching and Learning Committee that's been led by several directors and Instructional Technology Department. In addition to that, Teachers of the Years provided feedback. We heard from parents. We do have, Weslaco ISD has had one-to-one technology for every single child in Weslaco ISD. During the spring, because we quickly closed, we provided one Chromebook per family. We are prepared. We do have a Chromebook for every single child in Weslaco ISD. And not only that, from the feedback from our teachers and from the feedback from parents and many others, we know that we need headsets for students, because there's some families where the kids sit 2 to 3 children around the table, maybe more. And if we're going to have the synchronous where the teacher's on live and the children are looking at their teacher live on the computer, or even the asynchronous when the teacher has to check in and call the student, it's important that kids can focus in on with their headphones and their mic just to that classroom, because each one will be, if you have 3 or 4 children, each child will be focusing in with a different teacher. So that was important. The document cameras came up as something that's really, really important for our teachers who like to, write down the problem so the children can follow the steps, more important. So this was very thoughtful. Again, the Teaching and Learning Design Committee, the Teachers of the Years, everybody part of that, very, very lots and lots of layers of thinking through this. And what does Weslaco ISD need, so that we know the best education is face-to-face. But we also know the reality of today. We may not be able to offer that. So when we can't offer that, what's the next best thing when we're remote? And this is the thinking of multiple stakeholders in Weslaco ISD. So again, thanks, Board of Trustees. We're going to have some items today on the board agenda for some of these, and then others we'll be talking about how we plan to acquire them, because our plan is to have everything ready before the first day of school for parents who need to come pick up, like the entire package, if that's what they need. So just thank you again to the team. Great work.
Dr. Canales and Carlos, and this is a quick fix, the hotspots. Do we have somebody looking at a more permanent fix, as far as setting up more permanent hotspots, for lack of a better word, throughout the city where our students can connect? And in other words, I don't want us to be the last district that does something. I want us to be the first. And if we have to hire a consultant or somebody that can come in and give us ideas, I'm all for it.
Yes, Mr. Lopez, we are already currently looking at other options for future. It's just a short term. We decided to go to the hotspots as the best way, but we are looking at other options in the long term.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you.
It may take a little bit longer to set up, but the team we want every single student, every single child in Weslaco ISD to be connected day one. Our children miss each other, our teachers miss our children. We want to just be ready day one. So the hotspots, like Mr. Martinez shared, was the easiest or fastest way to go at this point in time.
And I agree. And I agree. But let's keep on looking to the big picture, or for the future. I really thought that this COVID thing was going to blow over
We did too.
by now, and I think most of us did in this meeting. Yet it doesn't seem to be going away. It doesn't seem to be calming down, getting more serious, as a matter of fact. So I think we need to prepare and be ready for a long run on this.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you.
Dr. Canales, quick question. I don't know if it's been discussed yet or not, or if it's coming up, but with this remote learning, are we still undecided as to whether the teachers are going to be teaching from the classroom, or is that still something that's being discussed? Where are we at with teachers?
So where we're at with the Texas Education Agency information, the latest is we have to offer in-person teaching and learning. So in-person means students and teachers in classrooms in schools. Synchronous, what we're still fleshing out is how that looks, because if a teacher has some students in the classroom right here in front of me, and if there are 10 in front of me, I may have 10 synchronous on the computer, joining the classroom virtually, that I also have to facilitate. It gets more and more complicated, especially when you start looking at attendance regulations to draw attendance and what's considered when a student's, what are the factors that counts a student present. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot of layers to this. So right now it looks like people in buildings, our teachers in buildings, our staff in buildings, and students whose parents choose to be in buildings as well.
And what is TE saying? What if come August, September, things are worse than what they are right now, and they say no students in buildings right now, but have they said if they're going to still want teachers in the classroom, if that becomes a possibility or a situation?
They may move back to what we had with us being able to, those who can work remote, through technology to be able to work remote. It's interesting. I didn't hear this, but I know Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Robledo heard this, and I read it though. The governor recently stated, Mrs. Peterson, do you want to repeat what he recently stated about, a couple of weeks ago, it was like the fall will be, and we thought it's going to be safe for everybody to be in school in the fall. Most recently, given the cases in Houston and other areas, Hidalgo, County, the San Antonio area, he basically said, like, it's a wait and see. We may have to start school remote learning as a state. So, Mr. Rodriguez, I don't have a definite, this is what it's going to be.
So what will happen? I'm sorry. What will happen if a student tests positive? What happens to the rest of the class? Are they all quarantined? They're no longer coming back to school until they get tested? What will happen then?
Mr. Kennedy, I'm gonna back up some slides. Mr. De La Rosa, will you cover that section?
Yes, Mr. Kennedy. Basically, if a student in a cohort is identified as a positive case, then the entire cohort or the entire classroom will have to quarantine at home for 14 days and/or until they're cleared by their physician to come back to school. That includes all the students in the classroom and the teacher.
I apologize if you already covered this, but so how are you going to serve lunch or recess?
I'm going to let Mr. Aguilar chime in on that, but I think that the preliminary plan right now is to either A, serve lunch in the classroom, or B, utilize the cafeteria, but have, of course, all the social distancing policies in place.
Both of those options are correct, Mike, and we've talked to the principals about both of those things. It will just depend on what's in place at the time when we open school in the fall.
What about recess period?
The students are allowed to go outside and play. Outside is really the non-issue part of things. They're even recommending that all PE classes only meet outside.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, those are going to be options, but the least movement that we have from students from where they're at, instead of moving them from location A to location B, we want to go ahead and be moving our teachers at this time. But again, those options, principals have been looking at it. They have their plans in place. and we are looking at all those scenarios.
Okay, continue, Dr. Canales.
So we're going to move to the next part of this COVID-19 planning for next year is what we know now about programs that fall under the UIL, or University Interscholastic League. Mr. Reelhus.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Canales, Mr. Nieto, the members of the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go over a couple of important dates that have been put out by the UIL since the emergency closure due to COVID. I know, we know that UIL and everything involving UIL is part of the overall education experience. So we know how important these programs are to us. So as of May 1st, 2020, the council approved a proposal that would adjust requirements related to the athletic physicals. So basically what they did was, because of the COVID-19 and to keep doctors for doctors to focus, the mercury to focus on the pandemic, the UIL did change the ruling for this 1 year, and is not requiring a physical for any student that had a physical last year. Okay, so technically what's happening here is if you're an incoming 7th grader, you will need a physical, or a first-time participant to UIL sports. However, there is a clause here. Every student must fill out a health history prior to the start of the new year. If in that health history you indicate that you have a history of a cardiac problems, then you automatically will have to take a physical. We do have our trainers that are monitoring that through rank 1. It is all virtually or all online, and our parents have been very active and filling out those forms. So we have been communicating with our kids throughout the summer on the plans for physicals for the coming year. Okay. Also, June 17th, can you back up, please, Carlos? On June 17th, or I'm sorry, May 22nd, the UIL released that the summer strength and conditioning could initiate as of June 8th. As you know, a lot of schools did start their summer strength and conditioning. We did as well. We put together a very precise plan following all TA and UIL guidelines. Due to some kiddos and concerns, we went ahead and we postponed, and that's kind of where we are still right now with the summer strength and conditioning. On June the 17th, the UIL did upgrade or released the ability for any school in the state of Texas to live stream Friday night games. And so I think the $1 million question from anybody, anywhere I go, is, are we having sports next year? I think I want to make me a shirt that says, I hope so. We're planning on it or something, because that's the $1 million question. And I understand it's important to our kids. Okay, next slide, Dr. Canales.
How will the band practice, marching band, and what happens with students whose parents want to opt them out of that?
That would be a question for Mr. Bissett. I did not ask him about band. However, the band does have our band, UIO band also has very strict guidelines on what they can and can't do. Obviously, they start early or middle of summer as well, and so Mr. Bissett would have to answer that question. So I apologize, but I can certainly get that information to you on a board update.
Patrick, Mr. Kennedy, I have a little bit of information on that only because I looked at some of the data that was out there and talked to Mr. Bissett. So there's one distance if they're just standing in a bandal, or let's say like maybe practicing the marching formation. But once they start to play, I believe the distance is 10 feet. And if a parent wants to opt out, we would work with them and allow their child to opt out. We'll discourage that because we want them to stay in. But we'll work with parents on that issue.
Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. And you can call me Patrick anytime.
Sorry about that.
No, absolutely. You're welcome to it.
All right.
And thank you, Ms. Peterson. And on this slide, just wanted to kind of just, again, There hasn't been a lot of correspondence from the UIL as of today, but a statement from Dr. Brydup from the UIL, and if you'll see it, I promise everybody on this call and everybody listening, we are absolutely dedicated, as Dr. Brydup mentioned, to having seasons this year and getting plans out to schools in time to plan for those activities in an appropriate way, just as soon as we can. So, when we do have telephone communication with the UIL, they're very optimistic, very positive, and are planning on providing us with some guidance on how we will have athletic programs come this fall. And that's basically it.
Coach.
One question,
Yes.
Mr. Lopez.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Mr.
Mr. Lopez, go ahead.
You want me to go?
Yes, go ahead.
Coach, in regards to FFA and show animals and stuff like that, I know that last year the season was sort of kind of almost terminated right at the end. And the reason I ask is I know that students purchase animals and spend a lot of money, and there's things they need to prepare for. Is there going to be any change in that for next year?
I know, Mr. Lopez, I know Ms. Avila and the ag teachers have been meeting as well. We did share our plan that we use for UIO that we created for the summer strength and conditioning. The summer strength and conditioning plan is going to be very, very, very similar to what we think is going to be required of us come August for any sports that are in session. It talks, it's got all your guidelines that you have to follow. We have shared that with Ms. Avila and with Mr. Bissett as well, so that they can start using that as a resource, if you will, to start planning for the year. And just case in point, Mr. Lopez, last week, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Garcia, Ms. Avila, and the ag teachers were meeting to discuss those options or those potential of bringing in the animals, because this is kind of key. It's kind of peak time right now, sir. Hogs are being purchased, goats are being purchased,
Yes.
steers are being validated. This is peak time right now to start getting those animals ready.
And the reason I ask is, will these students be left out in the cold if shows are canceled? And I mean, what are they to do?
Yes, sir.
It's Mr. Lopez. This is Sergio Garcia. It's kind of a waiting game right now. As Coach mentioned, we're all collaborating on the planning. In band, for example, with Mr. Bissett, he did come up with a plan. Ms. Avila and I, and in conversation with the ag teachers, we've been talking about, okay, so, we put out several scenarios to see, what's going to happen if we do open up, completely, or if we don't. And pretty much we're just waiting for guidance from the commissioner to decide what steps are we're going to go ahead and take.
Okay. Well, Coach, I would just ask that make sure that we know that parents are informed, especially the FFA and those parents that are, buying project animals and steers and goats and all that, there's a lot of unknowns at this point, that before they invest all that money or big money in something like that.
Yes, sir. Will do, sir. And so as far as for UIO, it's kind of the same thing, sir. We're waiting to see what kind of guidance we're going to receive for the start.
We can go forward until final decisions are made. And I know also Coach Rojas for UIL, have they determined? I know that they need to be in attendance for 240 minutes to get ADA. But what about for UIL? Have they made a decision on the number of minutes they have to log in before they can participate? In the past, they used to be at school at least half a day. Have they determined any decision yet on this year?
No decision yet on that, sir. We have been meeting with our high school principals and coordinators because of course the schedules, and we're not certain about the schedules or if we're going to go remote or what have you. But we are looking into the contact minutes during the week, which is the 300 minutes. And then we are looking at the 8 hours when you're in season. The UIL will also allow in August a 1 hour of strength and conditioning after school for all programs that are not in season. And it's kind of a means of allowing you to get caught up because of time you may have lost in the summer. And so that's also something that's been put out by the UIL as well. So we are concentrating on trying to maximize the 300 minutes of contact and then maximizing the 8 hours a week of contact for programs that are in season, I should say. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Oscar.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Canales.
This was the last slide for the updates on COVID-19 and planning for fiscal 2020-2021 academic school year.
Okay. Any other comments from any of the board members on COVID-19 questions?
Mr. Nieto, I just want to say that there were many questions.
Yes, sir.
A lot of questions. No one has all the answers yet. We're just going to have to wait for the next 4 or 5 weeks to get many of the answers. But again, many questions and no answers right now for the whole state, not just us.
Correct. Very good. Good points. Anybody else?
I'd just like to say we're in very uncertain grounds right now, and I want to thank our staff for, like Dr. Rivera said, things are changing. It feels like 2 weeks ago, TEA was saying something completely different. They'll put in a lot of work, and I think our constituents out there should be happy with what the administration is doing. I just want to say thanks for all your hard work.
And I think that's a good point, Mr. Kennedy. And as soon as we know from the state what the decisions are going to make, then we can notify our stakeholders and our parents. So that way they'll be prepared for the beginning of the year.
I agree with all that is being said about the unknowns and Dr. Canales and all your team, your cabinet. I want to commend you all and I know that you all are staying on top of all the new news and what the way it develops and what's next and where do we go and it's a constant adjustment period of where we're going to go. And I know that you will take us and your team will take us in the right direction. And I want to thank you all for that.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Canales, well, let's continue with item 5, which is the 2021 budget.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about how COVID-19, how we anticipated to impact the budget for the 2020-2021 school year. Mr. Sanchez will present what we know, and even with the budget, things are changing. I mentioned a few minutes ago about attendance and how you count attendance. We all know how to count attendance when it's in person, face-to-face. There's some guidelines for what are the remote options, the asynchronous when it's not virtually face-to-face, and how you count that. The optional flexible school day program can still count for children attending in person. And there may be other options for if I'm absent in person. So we have to figure all that out as we look at ADA for next year. But I'm going to turn over to Mr. Sanchez to present based upon what we know. And it's not a firm foundation what we know right now with attendance, but we're doing our best for this as well. So Mr. Sanchez, will you please begin?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Nieto, Dr. Canales, members of the board. For the 2021 preliminary budget, I have some information to present to you. Some of it I've discussed before, some of it is new. The budget was initially calculated with 14,805 ADA. That represents 94% of what we budgeted last year. As Dr. Canales mentioned earlier about the attendance, new information released by TA, we figured out that we'll be able to use the SASI program, the flexible school attendance, ADA. Initially, we thought we weren't, now we are. So that number that we have there is going to increase from 14,805 to 15,335 at the end of the first paragraph. Right now, I have mentioned to you, we gave the schools 94%. We budgeted our budget, set up our budget at 94% of ADA. The school got 90% of what they got last year, based on the attendance they had. and they got that same amount they get other years per ADA. Elementary schools, $120, middle schools, $135, and high schools, $200. Any questions on that?
So, Mr. Sanchez, you said that they're receiving 90% of last year's budget that they had?
Yes, whatever amount we gave them for the local funds, we give them 90%
For this year?
for the next year, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Next page, please. Okay. The Hidalgo County continues to release information every week on preliminary property values. Every week there's a report. Right now, the last one that exists is as of June 29. And that report shows a preliminary increase in property values of 11% over last year. That goes from the certified values of $2,409,000,000 to $2,674,000,000. So that's 11% increase. That higher amount on the appraisal values causes us to have our tax rate to go lower, and I'll explain more in a little bit. So these things change every week. Last time I told you something, now it's different. And it will continue like that until we get to July 25th when they issue the final certified values. Right now, we're looking at 11% increase. The budget, as I mentioned before, is based on 94% of the ADA budgeted for last year. The budget we started at 14,805. With additional SASI ADA, the figure will be changed to 15,335. That's in the fourth bullet. The Gifted and Talented Program, the Special Education Program, which have a lot of local funds, were budgeted at 90% of last year. The state allotment funds like CTE, bilingual ed, early education, and dyslexia were calculated at 94% of last year's budget.
Sorry.
The state count budget was also calculated at 94% of the geographical counts provided by TA for the 1920 school year. So since we don't know what we're going to have next year, we use 94% of last year. I had mentioned before the last bullet about the Federal CARES Act, the federal funding that we thought initially was additional funds. We now know that it's not going to be. It's just going to be the same. It's going to replace some of our state funds. So no additional funds there. Any questions, please? No? Next page, Dr. Gonzalez, please. The preliminary 2020-2021 budget is very short in revenues compared to the 2019-2020 fiscal year. The adopted budget for 1920, due to the uncertainty faced by Weslaco ISD and the current circumstances imposed by the coronavirus pandemic. We've been going over this and the presentation and other items. As expected, the budget is no exception. We had initially budgeted $945 million. We're changing that to a lesser amount. We thought we're going to be 945 less. We're now only projecting 415 less ADA than last year. So hopefully everything materializes, or we have more attendance than that, and the revenue will increase. Right now, the property tax revenues for the current levy are budgeted at only 85% instead of 92% as last year. The prior year property tax revenues are budgeted only at 10%. Last year we budgeted 20%. Athletic event revenues are budgeted only at 15% from last year. Interest income is budgeted at the current rates instead of the much higher rates we had at the beginning of the year. We're about 25% now than it was at the beginning of the year, so we had to lower the budget for interest income. We may have to present a deficit budget. I know we don't like it and it doesn't look good, but right now we're looking at a deficit budget, and I'll give you more details in the next pages. Any comments or questions?
Andres, have you considered lower tax collections for next year?
Yes, sir. Yeah, the rate is lower, and I'm expecting only 85% instead of 92. It might be less than that because
how is that going to affect us?
Well, less local revenues for the taxes, and the less taxes also affect the state revenue that we get from the state, the tier 2 revenue that we get.
Okay,
less money.
It looks like we're already shorted by $7 million. Is that correct?
Well, that is the initial amount. It would turn to 4.7 instead of 7.4.
So we're already short $4 million.
Right.
What other amount are you considering as being short
The revenues here,
or possibility?
ADA and taxes are the biggest ones. Interest income also helps. Alternative revenues helps a little. And those are the bigger amounts that we have reductions in revenue.
But on tax collections, what are you prepared to absorb or prepared to
Not absorb, but that is part of the deficit. Last year we budgeted 92%, and we ended up collecting about 95% by the end of the year. So this year or next year, I'm only budgeting 85%. Like I said, that might be too high. Right now we don't know what's going on. All the is that Dr. Rivera said we're all in the same boat. Try to predict what we're gonna do. We don't know.
Well, I don't have the experience to tell you what to do. I know Dr. Rivera is the guru, the doctor on this type of thing. So hopefully he'll chime in.
Yeah. No, the taxes
Dr.
are
Rivera, any comments, Dr. Rivera, on the? I think you're muted. We can't hear you, Dr. Rivera.
We can't hear you, Doc. You're muted.
Try it again. I guess he froze. Dr. Rivera, are you on? Continue, Mr. Sanchez, while Dr. Rivera comes back on.
Yeah. Okay.
What would it take to balance the budget?
Oh, we will have to make cuts on some of the items that we have. We have all the payroll that we had before. It's included. And I need to, now that you mentioned that, I was going to mention that later on. We started the presentation with a 7.4 deficit. And then when we recover some ADA that we can project through the SASI program, the deficit went down to 4.7. We have in the budget 29 vacancies that we had included. When we start preparing the budget, Mr. Kennedy, we use the payroll for March that has all the employees we have. We use that as a guide for the following year. So we budget there the employees that retire. So when we hire those employees for the vacancies that we do fill, the employees that we hire usually have less experience. So there's some savings on every employee that we hire in those vacancies. So that's one of the ways we do it, to save some money, to have a cushion, if you want to call it like that. So we have some 29 vacancies right now that are not reflected in the budget. I spoke to Mr. Segura, and that adds up from all those vacancies that we have, close to $3 million. And that, if we're going to continue evaluating vacancies, whatever we don't fill, that will be a reduction to the deficit in the budget that we have right now.
Right, and just for that, there's 36 vacancies right now in the books, and what we're doing is we're looking at surveys from parents. We're looking and asking ourselves the questions about just, is this an essential position? Is it impactful? What results does it get? And is it equitable? So most of the funding for school districts is in staffing. The other areas that we're looking at is programs too. What value, what's the return in our investment for programs that we have had in place for a couple of years? So it's the same questions. Essential program because it's impactful and it helps with the equity.
All right, continue, Mr. Sanchez.
Yes. The budget includes fine arts. It's in there. Band. We have some travel. There's an amount budgeted for travel. It's about 400-some-thousand budgeted for employee and student travel. That's something that may not be spent. So that's something that we can look at, or something we will look at as we continue with the budget. Because every week as we go, we're going to be looking at the revenue, the expenditures, everything. Make sure we have the correct numbers, that we didn't make any mistakes. You're checking on some of the items that we're still gathering some more information. But that's also something that we will consider. Some of the items in the budget, the travel that we have 400,000 or something like that, employee student travel that we have in there. Any other questions?
Andres, I know that ever since Dr. Rivera was there, we've been working on the rainy day fund, and Dr. Canales also. So thank God that I believe Weslaco ISD is in. Well, I know that it's never a good enough point, but I think we're in a decent shape to withstand some unknowns here. And Dr. Canales, Dr. Rivera, you guys have done a good job in getting us to this point. So, and Andres, of course, and all your staff have taken good care of us in a financial standings. I know you've received some good grades from TEA and standings and other kind of grade recognitions that you received. So, good job on that.
Thank you.
So just one more thing. Mr. Sanchez and I spoke earlier, and I've been speaking to Mrs. Peterson and Mr. Aguilar, looking at TA's requirements for attendance and what's going to be allowed, especially when we have to go to remote, live, virtual remote, and/or remote part-time with packets and things like that. There seems to be, they're going to allow us to count kids present under certain conditions. So we are going to huddle on that and make sure we know those rules inside and out. So in addition to the SASE, we have some ways to make sure that we connect children at different times to the learning environment so that we reduce the gap that may come, the teaching learning gap that may exist for some of our students, and that we also get the ADA, because as you've seen, if we continue with COVID-19, we're going to have to get a lot of resources, not only for our students, but for our teachers. So we're going to look at that very, very carefully. In addition to SASE, there may be some other ways that we can generate ADA for children who miss out on synchronous by capturing them asynchronous and vice versa. So we'll study that very carefully.
And I think, Dr. Canales, I think that's important there because, like Mr. Lopez mentioned, making sure that the students have the opportunity to log on with the hotspots. That's going to be very important because if they can't log on, we won't be able to get ADA. So very important there. Go ahead, continue.
Yes, I like to have ask a question from a slide that was shown earlier before. That's the teaching and learning, the equipment that we have listed for the requirement that we need for students. So
right here.
To teach from remotely. Of these 843,000 that we have estimated on some of the quotes that we already got and the estimate that we have for this, 168,000 is going to be presented to the board tonight. The remaining amount, which is about 680,000 more for all these other items, we can purchase these items from the current budget that we have in this year. What I wanted to is get a consensus from the board. Would you all allow administration? Would you feel comfortable allowing administration to do these purchases without bringing them to the board for approval? And the reason I'm asking this is so that we can get the orders placed and get them in time for school start.
I don't know if we can do that during this meeting.
Well, and it's not just a consensus whether you feel comfortable with it or not. I know it's not approval, it's not on the agenda, but if I mention on the agenda, I'm going to bring it up. The board policy allows us to make purchases of 25,000 or more that are competitively procured, and these will be approved vendors for the buy board or some other clubs like that. But if not, then we will have to call a special meeting either in the break or as soon as we come back to present this to you for approval.
Andres, I believe that the policy says if it's a budgeted expense, then you're allowed to make the purchase. So I'm not sure if this was.
Can you repeat that, Mr. Perez?
Yes, budgeted expenses is what's allowed. So I'm not sure if you're considering this a budgeted expense.
No, we have, well, it's not a specific budgeted like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can get the flavor of the board, but the board can't give you any definitive action tonight.
No, I know. I understand that part.
Yeah, we might have to have a special board meeting, Mr. Sanchez, to approve those.
And we're prepared to we will, the district is off beginning this Thursday to, I think, July 27th, but the team, we're committed to doing a virtual meeting if we have to. The important thing is, Board of Trustees, and is we definitely want to make sure that we have everything that's needed prior to the first day of school, just for our families and students who are going to be using remote learning, and just in case, as a state, they're going to move us all to remote.
Well, I wanted to bring it up, so that will be the explanation for the special board meeting.
Okay, Mr. Sanchez.
Dr. Canales, next slide, please.
Okay, hold on, no, I lost this place. Here? Yeah, M&O.
Yeah. On the property taxes, I was talking earlier about when I was mentioning the property values, the 2021 maintenance and operations compliance tax rate, the rates are being calculated by TEA. Since all the appraisal districts throughout the state will be issuing certified property values on July 25th, they're going to be sending it to TEA. TEA is going to look at them and going to be going one by one for all the 1,000 districts to calculate them. And they will issue them. They're expected to be issued by TEA on August the 5th. After we get it, we'll work with the property values at the time that we have, or should be the certified values, to calculate the budget with the final number that we need. Right now, I had mentioned last time a rate of $1.03, but I had that included in my calculation that House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 2, I believe, when they made changes last year with the legislature, they had indicated, and I had mentioned to you last year and when we approved the budget, that for the 2021 year, any property value increases will be limited to a 2.5% increase. And I just mentioned earlier, the property values had an 11.1% increase. So that's why TA is compressing the tax rate to make those limitations. And the template that we use to calculate the budget told us that the rate needed to be 98 cents, 0.9807. So that's when right now, that's what I'm looking at. Our rate will be for next year, 0.9807 for M&E. Last year was $1.04.
So Andres, in simple language, you're raising taxes.
No, and for M&O, no, it will be less.
No, yes, but you're raising taxes at
INS, I wanted to increase the INS.
Yes, but you're raising taxes, and right now, people losing their jobs is not the right time to be raising taxes, Andres. What you're gonna have to do, you're gonna have to go out there and tighten your belt. Look at the overstaffing, maybe not hire everyone. Look at your travel, look at things that you can reduce.
Yes.
But I'm thinking right now is not the time to tell our citizens that we're going to raise taxes by 3 pennies.
I understand. Yes, sir.
I agree with Dr. Rivera on that issue.
Good point, Dr. Rivera.
Okay. I understand the information. Thank you. And I wanted to where you all.
You got to tighten your belt. You got to find a way.
Yes, sir.
Call me and I'll help you.
Yes, we will. Yes, I will. now I have better grasp of the information that we have. Initially, I was having a hard time working with the ADA, like I had mentioned before. Now we have a better grasp on the information.
Yeah,
go ahead, Dr. Alice.
No, just that we will continue to do that and look at every vacancy to determine what is absolutely necessary. We'll look at programs and maybe softwares that currently exist that we need to strategically abandon because we do know we need to be ready for the remote. So thank you.
Now, next slide, please. From the Health Insurance, the Risk Management Department, discussing with Mr. De La Rosa on evaluating claims through May 31 of the current year. We anticipate that we'll have at least a break even. We'll break even or have some surplus for the 1920 medical plan. And therefore, we do not anticipate recommending an increase to the contributions to the medical plan by either the district or the employees. Any comments?
That's some good news right there.
Definitely good news.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. These are some of the audit items that we have under consideration by administration as we continue with the proposed budget for 2021. I had mentioned a preliminary budget deficit of 4.7 million, which could be adjusted, decreased by the travel, the vacancies not filled, And also, we had discussed UIL stipends. Do we adjust them? Do we decrease them? We're discussing this. Yes. We haven't taken any formal action to recommend anything. It's something that we're discussing. Travel stipends, do we adjust them down or decrease them as well? The vacancies, as I mentioned, the vacancies. I put 36 vacancies in the budget. That's about $2.9 million right now. Mr. Good and Dr. Canales is working with them, evaluating that so we can recommend if we feel some or not. I have mentioned this already. Right now, the budget figure did not reflect any pay raises or compensation incentives. So that's something else you all had mentioned to us that we wanted for us to look into. We will continue as we go through the budget. Now that we have a better number, like I said, to see where we can cut, so we can try to come up with a one-time stipend increase for staff. And well, I have mentioned the vacancies already. Any questions on that?
I think, Andres, in the UIL stipends and travel stipends, we'll have to wait depending on what UIL decisions they make and before we start school. But
Yes,
on the incentive, I think a one-time incentive, whether it's December and May, depending on how much money we have available, I think it's important still to give at least a stipend to our staff members, especially as hard as they worked during this pandemic, this last few months, even though they were working from home.
Yes, sir. Next slide, Dr. Canales, please. Okay. And the timeline, we have a black T here. Tentative timeline. We did not have a meeting on the June 29, so this becomes budget workshop number 1. I inserted a tentative one for August the 3rd. Like you all mentioned, some information to consider to evaluate. So I like to have it in the list if you will feel comfortable with it. And we have information, we'll let you know. So we could possibly have one on that day. And then August the 10th, before the regular board meeting, tentative budget workshop number 3. And then on the 24th, a public hearing to discuss the budget and the tax rate. After that, a special meeting on the 24th to approve the budget and other items that we need to discuss at the time. And then in September, the tax rate could be either done on August 24th or in September. It can be done on August 24th as well. Any questions on the timeline?
Andreas.
Yes, sir.
Let me go back a little bit for you. You mentioned the travel stipends.
Sure.
Do you have the amount with you as to what the savings would be on that?
No, sir, I don't have it.
Could you update the board?
Sure, we can put it on the update.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions at this time? Before we continue to the last item on the board workshop?
Well, I have one question.
Okay,
sure.
Dr. Canales, we are open enrollment. Does that work on the internet education, or
no?
In other words, my question is, can we get a student from where? What's the farthest we can get somebody to come on, even if they can do? I mean, the internet's everywhere. World Wide Web, I believe it is.
Yes, it is. It is. If we move, I don't know about the distance about the FAR, we are open enrollment, so we can accept students from nearby. And I would think, because if we do open up in person eventually, they need to be able to also transport their child to in person.
Okay, so they would have to be able to be here at some time or another.
Yes, we would open up. I guess they could always withdraw if they enroll just for the benefits of the online instruction that Weslaco ISD provides. They could always probably withdraw. I'd have to look into that, Mr. Lopez, and get back to you, get with staff on that.
Yeah, and the reason I ask, because I mean, I think these things are going to be unlimited, with how we're going to educate our kids and our children. So I think we need to start looking into that. How far can we go out? What are our boundaries? And what our restrictions are on something like that, and pros and cons that need to come for the board to know.
All right. Any other comments? Item number 6, fiscal year start date change. Dr. Canales?
For this one, we did mention this during the last meeting, during the superintendent's report about the possibility of having a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year and what the pros and cons were. So administration has evaluated the possibility of changing the fiscal date year from September 1st to July 1st. This coming school year, 2020-2021, would be a planning year. 2021-2022 would be a 10-month fiscal year that would run from September 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. Fiscal year 2022-2023 would be the first 12-month fiscal year with a July 1st start date. So it would be July 1st, 2022 through July 30th, 2023. Mr. Sanchez mentioned during the last meeting some of the advantages of switching. It would need to be, the budget would be approved prior to the beginning of the new school year. Schools could order the supplies that they may need prior to the school year start in the fall. Salary contracts would be aligned with the fiscal year because most of the fiscal year's revenues would have been earned and received, and only 10 months of expenditures would be made in the year of change, that is 21-2022. 10-month fiscal year would generate an additional surplus of funds. So it's a one-time surplus of funds because of that 10-month of expenditures. And a conservative estimate of additional surplus funds that has been estimated by our business office staff is $4.5 million for that scenario. And the additional funds would increase the district's unassigned fund balance in the local maintenance fund, and the increase in unassigned fund balance would get closer to the 90-day required fund balance. So those are the advantages of switching. The disadvantages of changing is the budget preparation for the fiscal year. Starting after legislative years could be difficult because information related to the changes by the legislators may not be available prior to the adoption of the budget. Another con is certified property values would not be available for calculation of the tax revenues. Therefore, the budget would be prepared using more conservative figures than usual. And PEMS information will need to be reported in both the fiscal year of the change and the first July 1st, June 30th fiscal year. So that's going to be a little challenging task for our staff. So the fiscal year change requirements, the TA form, FIN 003 must be filed with TA after board approval. And copies of the board minutes, we need to provide them as with the form. And I think that concludes the gist. So we have this item on the board meeting agenda. And Mr. Sanchez can answer any of the questions or his staff that you may have about this possibility.
Dr. Rivera, are you on, what's your comments on changing the fiscal year?
It's going to be a whole year, so I think Andres has a whole year to kind of plan and look at it, look at the pros and cons. And
yes, sir.
Call. But he's got a year to plan it.
Okay. Any other comments?
It's been a while, but I remember I went to one of our conferences, I think in San Antonio, and they had a class on this, and the board members who had switched to this new fiscal year were very much in favor of it, but I'd have to dig through my old notes to find out what their exact arguments were. But I remember they spoke very highly about this change.
I think that's correct, Mr. Kennedy. Several school districts in the Valley have changed their fiscal year. Last year or this year, several districts have gone to the new fiscal year.
So changing the fiscal year, will that help with the budget?
Andres?
Well, preparation will be a little tougher than it is. Like the district, like they have a July 1 start for the fiscal year. Right now, they're having a very hard time because with all this stuff going on, they don't know what to do. Like we're having a hard time with, and they already started. The other one is when you start after legislature, that some of the laws are being passed, that some of the stuff that still haven't decided. When you have a July 1 start, the legislature may not have all the information available, so you don't know what to budget on the revenues or things like that. Well, that's the two toughest part on preparation of the budget.
But Andres, like Mr. Dr. Rivera mentioned, you have a year to prepare and look at all the options, so that way we'll well-verse for that.
Yeah, but those are the ones where I see issues with the budget that we have to make more conservative estimates on what we're doing than what we usually do.
Correct.
Yep.
All right, Dr. Canales, any final comments?
That's it, just Board of Trustees, again, thanks to all our faculty, staff, our principals, our district leaders, just everybody's just pitching in to make the best of the situation. We appreciate your leadership and your understanding and support as we create a new way, at least for next year, for our students and our staff.
Okay, so this ends the workshop. So log off of this one, and in 3 minutes, we'll log on into the regular board meeting.